Hey friend, in today's watercolor tutorial, I'm going to be teaching how to paint this winter landscape with a river, snowbank, and a pastel sunrise. Without further ado, let's get painting. In today's tutorial, I'm going to be using yellow ochre, purple, Prussian blue, Payne's gray black, and Van Dyke brown by Winsor & Newton. The paper I've taped down here is a size 5 by 7 inches, and the brushes I'll be using today are by Princeton brand, and I've got a size 2, size 6, size 16 round brush. To get started, I want to really lightly sketch using my size 2 brush with some watered down yellow ochre. Just our composition, just so we can kind of get a layout down. So with our snowbank in the border of our little river we're going to be painting, I'm going to start just above halfway down the page here. So I just got a horizontal line just to start. Then from here, I want to bring it downward, kind of jaggedly. So I'm just going to do a slightly curved line right after that horizontal line. And then I'm just going to do kind of a swooping motion, kind of like a horizontal S curve. And I'm just going to do a subtle curve, just like so. And then bring this curve back down. And then do a second little S curve. And then just kind of do some irregular C shapes or C curves here. And then all the way down. Definitely take your time, and you can even pause at this point of the painting process just to follow along and mimic this sketch line here. Next, we're going to have a little bit of a snowbank on the left side as well, just partially shown. I'm just going to start with a rounded curve like so, and then just give it a little bit of irregular curvature here at the bottom, just like that. And then next, I want to sketch a horizon line. So just going above this original first sketch line here, and then just doing a really loose, slightly curved kind of hill, just like that. So we've got kind of a straight area up until almost halfway, and then a couple really subtle curves. Next, I'm going to take my large size 16 round brush and just do a wash of water all the way from the top of the page to the horizon line. All right. To begin, we're going to start with our lighter color first. So I'm going to just take a little bit of yellow ochre, and just starting in the first inch or two, I'm going to just lay out our yellow ochre, allow it to bleed and blend. And I'm gradually going to bring it up a little bit higher. And the water will just help kind of tone it down just a little bit. So if your yellow ochre started strong, just take your brush and glide it across this first inch to inch and a half or so. And then I'm going to bring it up a little bit higher in the center. Just going to grab a little bit more. It's best to just start a little bit less with the pigment, so that way you can always add more. It's a little bit trickier to take it away though, if you start super strong from the get-go. All right, I'm just gonna bring a little bit yellow ochre just up here. All right, and now I'm gonna take just a touch of Prussian Blue, and I'm just lightly making my brush kind of do this circular motion on its side. Allowing the water to kind of create these soft blends. Gonna overlap a little bit of the Prussian blue on a couple random parts of the yellow. And then from here, I'm gonna just get a very small amount of purple, very pastel and faint, just to overlap slightly in a couple areas over the Prussian blue. And this contrast of the gold and yellow ochre with just a touch of the purple is going to be a nice balance of color. And we're kind of hinting at a sunrise here. Okay, and next I want to kind of mimic this kind of color that we've got here into our stream here. So we're going to add a little bit more depth of color and deepen this river with the value of Payne's gray and a touch of black as well. And what's going to be interesting is we are also going to add some reflection of our foliage that we haven't quite painted yet. So kind of doing this part a little bit backwards, but that's okay. All right, so my whole river here is now saturated with water. And I'm going to start with my lighter color first. So I'm going to start with some yellow ochre up in this kind of left area here. And then taking my brush, I'm just pulling from that yellow ochre that we just applied and dragging it across. Just like so. If needed, you can grab a little bit more. Okay, and while the bottom area of our lake here is still wet, I'm gonna just tap a little bit of Prussian blue to begin. And taking our Prussian blue to start, I'm just going to apply some with my brush and just do this really subtle circular motion with the side angle of my brush to kind of blend just a little bit with our hues of the yellow ochre. And then from there, I want to tap my brush in some Payne's gray, which is very, very potent. And I'm going to start just by adding shading underneath this partial snowbank here, kind of taking my brush just to divvy it up a little bit. And then I'm going to simply just go along this border, and I'm going to color over the yellow ochre sketch line as well. I'm just going to buff out some of that Payne's gray here. And then I'm just going to take my brush on its side and just tap and add a little bit more Payne's gray in this wet area here. And then I'm just kind of incorporating this color. I'm going to outline the bottom of this curve here with a touch of Payne's gray. And then making sure to just cover that yellow ochre a bit. I'm going to get a little bit more Payne's gray with my brush here and just add a little bit more shadow and shading here, defining this edge of the snowbank. I'm going to do the same thing over here as well. And taking my size 6 brush and just switching gears a little bit, I'm going to take my wet size 6 brush and just help kind of buff out the harsh line between the yellow ochre transition and the Payne's gray. So I've got a slightly damp brush here just to help soften that a little bit. And then I'm just going to redefine it just a hair bit with layering a touch more of that Payne's gray, building up that contrast and dimension. Okay. Next, I would like to now take a touch of purple, just a little bit, and just apply a touch of that in the water down below. And I'm just taking my damp brush, size 6, to kind of help with that transition. Moving my brush in a circular motion at its side. Okay, now I'm just going to take a little bit more Payne's gray in this area. And just smooth out that transition. Lots of layering. Okay, now I want to start to kind of build some of our reflections there that we're going to have with our foliage that we have not done yet, but we'll be doing. And I'm going to mix up some Van Dyke Brown with some yellow ochre. And carrying on with the size 6 brush, I'm going to first start with a couple just jagged brush strokes here, really loose. And then I'm just going to do just a few loose brush strokes in a really loose, like upside down, jagged triangle kind of shape here. And do the same thing here, keeping it super loose. And here I'm just going to tap my brush, allow it to kind of bleed out a little bit in the reflection with some of the wet paint. Here I'm going to lift some of this pigment just a hair bit, just so that way I can get kind of that loose, watery quality that I'm looking for the water reflection. I'm going to grab a touch more of just straight yellow ochre and just slightly overlap that just to brighten the value a little bit. Now I'm just gonna lightly tap my brush around these edges just to soften that transition once more. Okay, awesome. And now we're gonna do just a little bit of reflection detail over here as well. And we will come back to this in a moment. But before we do that, I'm just gonna take my size 6 brush and take some Payne's Gray. And I'm just using light pressure with the tip of my size 6 brush. And I'm just going to paint some kind of dead bush foliage, like branches, kind of reflecting. So I'm just doing really light, simple brushwork with light pressure and just doing some connected, jagged, loose lines. Just like so. And I'm going to do the same thing on this other left side here, deep into the corner. Okay, so we've got some reflection here that's just simple and loose. And I'm gonna buff out some of the branches that are kind of bleeding out. So I'm just taking a dry brush just to kind of lift and erase some of the bleed. Okay, so now we can move on to some of the details in our background here. And I'm gonna start by layering up some straight yellow ochre. And I'm gonna do kind of like a silhouette of some foliage. And it's gonna be kind of in a golden hue. We're gonna layer up some Van Dyke brown as well on top of it. But for now, I'm just taking a good concentration of yellow ochre, just tapping my size 6 brush to get some loose foliage texture. And again, I'm making sure that the texture and like the spacing has some areas where there's more hills, etc. Some areas are higher than others. Okay, and then from this point, I'm actually going to switch gears to my size 2 brush, and I'm going to take some Van Dyke brown and start to shade the base with a good amount of this nice, rich Van Dyke brown color. And I'm just starting by doing a line across the base. And then I'm going to take my size 2 brush and just do a really loose up and down motion with the tip of my brush and some light pressure. And then with what's remaining on my size 2 brush, I'm just gonna do just a few almost grass-like brush strokes, just using the tip of my brush and fanning them out in different directions. Just to get that nice loose texture and detail in the background. Okay. And now before we move on, I'm going to paint a little bit more detail into our reflection here. So just taking that mix of Van Dyke Brown and Yellow Ochre from before, I just want to paint just a few really thin with light pressure vertical lines and kind of just irregular. This is going to be the reflection of some trees that we're going to add, but I just want to add a touch of that detail, and it's very subtle, so just some angled vertical line texture. Just to give it a little bit more of a pop. Okay. And then from here, I'm also going to add a little bit of reflection detail, just tapping my brush with a little bit of that Van Dyke Brown and Yellow Ochre blend off in this left area here. All right, so using our size 8 brush, I'm going to mix a touch of black with some Payne's gray. And just a hint of Prussian blue. I'm going to start by applying this color just in a horizontal motion at the bottom of our artwork. And then I'm going to take a wet brush and smooth out this transition and kind of drag it slightly above. I'm going to just lift some of the pigment with my brush. And with some of that pigment left on my brush, I'm just going to start by getting kind of a dry brush texture here, just above in the snowbank. So some rough edges, some white specks popping through. I'm just going to start kind of dragging this pigment across and then carry it over just a touch to the left here as well. Also want to shade this little corner here. Kind of doing an angled triangle. Again, I'm just going to soften that transition a little bit by just buffing it out with my brush. Okay, now I want to take just a touch more of this watercolor blend and just incorporate just some loose touches of shadows, adding a little bit more depth, a second layer of shading. And again, it's super loose. I'm going to add just a touch of dry brush texture to this snowbank here. Going to kind of buff it out a little bit. Again, just kind of playing with the different values. Okay, now I'm gonna just do the same thing on this little part of the snowbank. Just giving it a light shading. And again, I'm just kind of intuitively adding some angled sloping brush strokes. And I'm also trying not to go too crazy because sometimes I can tend to overshade snow. So I want to make sure that there are some pops of white just from the page itself. And then now that we have our snow shaded, I now want to move on to some of our foliage using our size 2 brush. And I'm gonna mix up some Van Dyke Brown with a touch of black. And once I have that mixed, I'm gonna go ahead and start to build some of our trees that don't have their leaves anymore. But I'm gonna start over here towards the left and starting with just a simple base. I'm then going to kind of branch off, pun intended, and do a few irregular, jagged vertical lines pointing upward. And then from each vertical line, I'm adding a couple angled branches pointed towards the sky. Just like so. And with branches, I tend to like to have some of them be kind of like in a Y shape, if you will. So I start with the base, a vertical line, just like this, and then I gradually start to just elongate stemming from that and do a few thin vertical lines and then kind of create the letter Y. And then from that Y, I just add a few more angled irregular lines. And they're very thin and delicate, but I just kind of build off of that. And they definitely overlap here and there. Okay, now I want to add one main kind of tall tree here. And it's gonna have a couple bases, like kind of a cluster of trees, if you will. So I'm just doing a few dash lines here. And then from there, I'm just doing some vertical lines that are slightly curved and jagged, and I'm just layering these up. And I am just doing really light pressure, especially as I get towards the top. And again, I'm kind of doing those Y letter shapes. Just like so. And then from here, I just want to thicken up a couple of the base branches here, just so we can tell that there's some that are just slightly more dense and stocky. There we go. All right, and now I'm just going to add a couple more trees, carrying on with the same technique. And as needed, I'm mixing up some brown and some black. And I'm just gonna carry that on, adding, I would say, 2 slightly small trees here and then 1 larger one towards the right. All right, and just a few last finishing touches. I'm gonna add just a little bit of branch texture, just doing some almost whisker-like brush strokes alongside the bases of our tree. So just a little bit of texture here, and I'm gonna just do a little bit alongside these areas too. Just very subtle, nothing overboard or crazy. Just tapping my size 2 brush. Okay, and then from here, I'm gonna just take a little bit of that Payne's gray and black Prussian blue mixture, basically our snow color, and I'm just going to shade just below here, just to give a little bit more detail. And I'll do the same thing at the base of these trees here, just tapping that nice shaded color well. And then from there, I'm just going to take my size 2 brush with some water and just kind of smooth that out a little bit at the base. And before I get ahead of myself here, I'm just gonna add kind of a dead, kind of bush-like detail here. So some branches with no foliage, again, carrying on with that kind of letter Y technique. Just trying to be sure to add a little bit of branch work here. And for our final step, I am gonna just take some Van Dyke Brown and some black again. And all I wanna do is texturize where the snowbank meets some of the background foliage here. That way it's not like a perfectly smooth line there. So I'm just taking the tip of my size 2 brush and just adding just some tapping motions alongside that edge. That way we have some more irregular brushwork going on. Okay, and that is it. I hope that you enjoyed this watercolor winter landscape tutorial. Be sure to like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel so you don't miss any further watercolor landscape tutorials.